Magnetoreception is an important thing for animal orientation, and it involves measuring and responding to the Earth's magnetic field.
So they don't have this innate need to follow a migratory direction, because they don't do that, but we can train them to follow the magnetic field as long as it's associated with another reward or another task.
Feel to us if we had an electric sense.
We're seeing mass extinction in many species around the world, and this is having a lot of negative impacts and could potentially have detrimental impacts on society. So biomimicry essentially is the idea that organisms and biological systems have a huge repertoire of kind of functions and problems that they've solved over 3.8 billion years. And so there's a lot of examples in nature of things that plants and organisms and animals do a lot better than humans. One, for example, is flying. So we've looked at birds and other flying insects and organisms throughout history to really try to find out how they're flying, studying their wings, and kind of apply that to our aviation, such as helicopters, planes, and other design innovation.
Other animals organize their senses differently based on their specific needs. Imagine a honeybee. The bee's perception of reality is radically different than ours. First, bees can see in other parts of the visual spectrum, so they're looking at stuff that we can't see, and they decide what flowers to go to based on different visual attributes. Bees base their color perception on ultraviolet light, which is blue and green, so bees actually can't see the color red. They don't have a photoreceptor for it.
So plants and animals perceive the world in completely different ways from each other, which actually helps them in the different functions that they need to achieve. For example, looking for food, finding prey, finding mates, for example, and actually just navigating the world. So the different senses that humans and other organisms have change, and that really has a huge influence on how we perceive the whole world.
Magnetoreception is an important thing for animal orientation, and it involves measuring and responding to the Earth's magnetic field. So the Earth has a magnetic field with a North Pole and a South Pole, and it is pretty constant on average. So animals that can measure the magnetic field can use it for directionality. If it is advantageous for them to swim to the northwest, then they can determine that based on the angle of the magnetic field. So you can see if you have the magnet that we are all familiar with is the proverbial Boy Scout magnet compass that you use in your hand, but that needle that points to the north is in a little box. So the needle can only move in the box, but it cannot move in up and down directions. If you now take the needle out of the box and you hang it by a little thread, then it will point not only to the north, but also down in this part of the world. So there are two different components to it, a horizontal component that we are familiar with, and a vertical component that we are usually not very familiar with because we don't measure it. We have a compass for horizontal, but not for vertical. But animals are using magnetic fields, those that can, and many can, both in the horizontal and the vertical field.
Other animals organize their senses differently based on their specific needs. Imagine a honeybee. The bee's perception of reality is radically different than ours.
One really interesting example of a kind of difference between human and animal perception is bees, actually. So bees perceive the world in a completely different way than humans. They kind of see in different parts of the visible spectrum. So they actually can see things that humans can't even see. So for example, when they're looking at flowers, they decide on which flower to go to based on different visual attributes.
First, bees can see in other parts of the visual spectrum, so they're looking at stuff that we can't see, and they decide what flowers to go to based on different visual attributes. Bees base their color perception on ultraviolet light, which is blue and green. So bees actually can't see the color red. They don't have a photoreceptor for it. The most likely colors to attract bees, according to scientists, are purple, violet, and blue. Bees also have the ability to see color much faster than humans. Their color vision is the fastest in the world, 5 times faster than humans. So while we may have trouble distinguishing one flower in a group from another, bees do not. They see each individual flower. Some flower petals appear to change color depending upon the angle. This is known as iridescence. It's often in the UV spectrum, so we can't see it, but bees can. They see these shiny petals and associate them with sugar. Thus, the flower becomes more attractive to the bees and gets pollinated. But a bee's super sight powers go much farther than seeing mere colors. A bee can also detect polarized light. Polarized light moves in one direction. It's caused when air molecules from the atmosphere scatter the photons to create a superhighway of light. A bee's amazing eye can scan and match the polarization patterns in the sky. It's a bee version of GPS. They are able to use this polarized light as a navigating system. What makes this such a superpower is that bees can use polarized light to locate direction even when the sun isn't shining. They then communicate these directions to the colony. Basically, it's a bee roadmap. Bees find their way back home by checking the pattern of polarized light in the sky. At the same time, honeybees have another sense that we don't have, or at least don't know that we have. They can pick up on electromagnetic radiation in the hairs on their legs and their hindquarters. And this ability gives them very important information about an electrical charge coming out of a certain plant. When a blossom has been visited by a bee recently, it has a less intense magnetic field, so the honeybees know not to visit that one. Imagine a world where we are picking up on the electromagnetic fields all around us. It might be pretty scary given how many electromagnetic fields we've added to the world. Honeybees have the ability to detect small fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. They can feel their way back to their hive after foraging in their gut. Many other animals, including salmon, sea turtles, zebra finches, butterflies, and possibly bears, dogs, and cows, have the ability to detect the Earth's magnetic field and to use it for an advantage, for navigation, for predation, and for other things we don't yet understand. So what is the Earth's magnetic field?
Most people will be familiar with a small magnet that has two different poles, two different sides. They either attract to each other or repel to each other. But it's a static magnet. You just have those two pieces, and it's formed by the crystals of iron inside of magnetite in it. A geomagnet, like our planet, it resembles that shape. We have a north pole and a south pole, so we have these two poles, but those the magnetic field and those two poles are formed by a dynamic fluid in the center of the planet. So it's not a static magnetic field, but it's changing over time. It's drifting and it's getting stronger or weaker at points, so it's always changing, and it's formed by the movement of iron and other components in the mantle of the Earth.
So a fascinating aspect of many of the movements of marine organisms and other animals on Earth is that the orientation strategies appear to rely on in many cases, the orientation strategies rely on geomagnetism. And geomagnetism is an invisible force to us humans, and it is formed by the liquid swirling outer core of the planet. And so as the molten iron and nickel revolve around the solid inner core, it produces an electromagnetic force, and the the force that is produced is what's known as geomagnetism.
Humans have used compasses for direction finding since the 11th century AD and for navigation since the 12th century. Although this magnetic declination does shift with time, the wandering is slow enough that a simple compass remains useful for navigation. Using magnetoreception, various other organisms, ranging from some types of bacteria to pigeons, use the Earth's magnetic field for orientation and navigation. Magnetoreception is a sense which allows an organism to detect a magnetic field to perceive direction, altitude, or location. This sensory modality is used by a range of animals for orientation and navigation, and as a method for animals to develop regional maps. For the purpose of navigation, magnetoreception deals with the detection of the Earth's magnetic field.
Magnetoreception is a sensory modality, in the same way as your vision or your hearing is a sensory modality. Magnetoreception enables animals to perceive the magnetic field of the Earth and use it as a source of information to move around their environment.
When you think of magnetoreception and which organisms display this attribute, you could think about birds, sea turtles, salmon, bees, for example. And these are all different organisms from flying to underwater that display magnetoreception in their ability to kind of find their way around the world.
When we think of animal navigation, we think immediately of homing pigeons. These remarkable birds have been used extensively as test subjects in order to develop a better understanding of migration and homing abilities. They have exhibited almost unbelievable navigation skills. But hundreds of different animal species display the ability to navigate using the Earth's magnetic field.
So insects, fishes, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, all of them have shown in one way or another sensitivity to the magnetic field. And what animals use it for, or the task that we have studied the most, is movement and migration, orientation and navigation. So animals can use the magnetic field as a spatial cue, as a source of information to know where to go. The magnetic field is dynamic enough and different enough across the planet that you can use it as a magnetic address. So if they know that they need to go towards where it's strongest or weakest, or towards where it changes in some specific way, they can use it as a cue to move around. It can be used also for local orientation, not to move from one continent to the other.
Ocean salmon are also remarkable navigators. Born in a small stream, they venture out to the open ocean when they are old enough to survive and spend years living and feeding there. They travel thousands of kilometers from their birthplace, but somehow, when the time is right, they are able to return to their home stream to spawn.
One of the species that we've studied particularly well in terms of their magnetic navigation ability are salmon. Salmon have an interesting life history in that they spawn in freshwater streams. For the Pacific salmon, the adults die. The young rear in these freshwater streams, and after a period of months or years, travel to sea to forage, get big and fat. After so the young forage in the ocean. But the movements of these young salmon do not appear to be entirely random. The dispersal is not just anywhere, but rather certain populations appear to go to foraging grounds that are specific to their species or the region where they're from. And so they seem to be following something of an innate migratory route.
After literally thousands of years of study, scientists were able to understand that animals use the Earth's magnetic field to navigate with incredible precision, but it's just in recent times that they're starting to understand how it works.
So unlike birds or caribou or other animals that might be able to find appropriate foraging grounds by tagging along with older, experienced parents, these animals have to make their migration to foraging grounds just on their own. Now, after they've found these foraging grounds, eaten, gotten big, gotten fat, they eventually return back to their natal river to spawn and repeat the life cycle. Now, the basis of these migrations is been one of considerable interest and considerable mystery. The interest, as you may well guess, is related to our desire to eat them. Knowing about salmon, where they go, as well as when and where they will return, is an important part of managing fisheries and setting expectations for what catch rates and the like will be. Now, what we have shown through a variety of experiments and analyses is that the young salmon, when they are migrating to foraging grounds in the open ocean, are actually capable of detecting where they are along their migratory route based on what magnetic field they're in. And we've shown that if you give a salmon a magnetic field that exists in the northern part of their oceanic range, on average, they will swim to the south. If you take those same salmon, place them in a more southern magnetic field, then on average they swim to the north. Now, mind you, in these experiments, they are sitting in a fish hatchery. They've never gone anywhere else. They've never had any migratory experience. And so the basis of these orientation decisions appears to be largely innate.
So the Earth's magnetic field exerts a mysterious and invisible force which somehow passes through water and tissue to gently rotate compass needles toward a distant and unseen pole. Recently, scientists have found that animals also use the Earth's field lines as magnetic signposts, positional information created by unique combinations of field inclination and intensity at specific geographic locations. Loggerhead turtles returning to the U.S. coast as juveniles after navigating the North Atlantic need to adjust their swimming direction at key locations to avoid being swept off course. The turtles are using the inclination and intensity anomalies to determine where and when to turn. For the animals that Dr. Jelle Atema studies, cardinal reef fish in Australia, having a keen sense of magnetic direction is the difference between life and death. These tiny fish have to find their way back home a few weeks after they are born in order to ensure their survival, but the ocean currents are always pushing them away from their home. The basic concept is that animals have magnetite embedded in their cells in different parts of their bodies. The magnetite interacts with the Earth's electric field like a compass needle and then sends a sensation to the animal's brain that gives them a feeling of direction and place. Perhaps if we can better understand how the animal's superpowers function, we can use that knowledge to ensure that they do survive. So if scientists are ever able to fully understand magnetoreception, we can then help the animals that possess this super sense.
But then this little thing, which is no more than a few millimeters long, about that, transparent, they have to go out of the reef to grow up on the outside, out of the reef, probably because the predation is more severe in the reef than outside. And there are two different kinds of compass. There's a magnetic compass and there's a sun compass. And they're both used. The most powerful is the sun compass, but you cannot always see the sun, and then the magnetic compass comes in to tell them about direction. And in the particular place where we were working, there is a trade wind driven ocean current that is almost constant the whole year long, and it flows towards the northwest. very well known by oceanographers. So now that means that all the odors and all the fishes and everything else is slowly drifting away. And if you don't do anything about it, you end up tens of miles away from your starting point. You don't want to do that, because then you can no longer come home in time to become an adult. So what the fishes seem to be doing, and so we did experiments to demonstrate that, is that for the sun compass, they literally know that in the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west, but because we have the Great Barrier Reef where we were, during the midday the sun is right straight overhead. Now, so with this method of measuring the direction of north, south and so forth, the animals showed us that they always want to go to the southeast. So that is opposing the northwest. The drifting current to the northwest would be dangerous for them after a while. So unless they swim against the current constantly, day and night, a little bit, they make up for the drift and they stay close to their home. Then they smell the home again, and now they're in the reef area, and so they're okay, they don't have to swim any further, because if they were swimming past their reefs based on this compass, then would lose it as well, then would lose it in the opposite direction. So the combination of smell and sun compass allows them to have a better chance to stay near the reef where they need to grow up later on. So the magnetic compass basically is the same thing, where it provides the animal with directional information. How they do it, what is the magnetic detection mechanism, we still don't know. The sun compass, of course, is clear vision, so they need their vision to see the sun. The thing that I find very fascinating here is that these directions have to be innate. It has to be something that comes with the animal, not something they can learn. So one interesting experiment would be to take an animal from where we were working, bring it 1,000 miles to the north where the magnetic directions are different, and see if the animal is orienting in the direction that it did at home and still do that the same direction away from home, or that they actually do something locally. It is unlikely that that's the case. I think people really, you almost have to believe that it has to be something that is genetically determined by experience over very, very many generations. So I think the larval reef fish is a good example of different senses are needed for animals to perform their life functions and survive. And the combination in this case is a combination of learning at a very young age the odor of your local environment and recognize it different from other reefs, and the use of two different compasses in order for them to stay near their home reef in case the drift is carrying.
That many animals sense and respond to Earth's magnetic field is no longer in doubt. But how this sixth sense functions is only recently becoming clear. Some researchers say it relies on an iron mineral, magnetite. Others invoke a protein in the retina called cryptochrome.
There are two main theories that two main models that may explain how an animal can detect the magnetic field. And these two different models or theories refer to different characteristics of the magnetic field. The one, not the simplest, but the easiest for the audience to understand, is a model that describes a magnetic needle the same way as a navigation needle, as a sailing compass. Imagine that same system, but inside somewhere in the body. So small particles, ferromagnetic particles or magnetite particles inside your body may react to the magnetic field in the same way as a navigation compass. So if you move away or towards the north, the needle will move, and that movement will be picked up by a neuron and then that interaction will be transmitted to your brain, and then you will know if you're moving away or towards the north. Such a mechanism will react with, or will provide information about the polarity of the field. So you will know if you're going towards the north or away of the north, and so on. The other mechanism is a little bit more complex because it refers to chemical reactions that can be affected by the magnetic field. So if you have a chemical reaction that will produce a result under certain alignment with the magnetic field. But if you have a different alignment to the magnetic field, the results of the same reaction will be different. So if you have a bunch of those reactions happening in your body, your brain will pick up on those results, and it will know if you have more results of certain alignment or more results of a different alignment.
Magnetite is a rock mineral and one of the main iron ores. It is attracted to a magnet and can be magnetized itself to become a permanent magnet. It is the most magnetic of all the naturally occurring minerals on Earth. Magnetite has turned up in bird beaks and fish noses and in the abdomen of many different fish, birds, amphibians, and insects. Scientists think that it tells an animal not only which way it is heading, which is called compass sense, but also where it is. The basic concept is that animals have magnetite embedded in their cells in different parts of their bodies. The magnetite interacts with the Earth's electric field like a compass needle and then sends a sensation to the animal's brain that gives them a feeling of direction and place. But no one has yet been able to prove that magnetite alone is capable of the full navigation abilities that we see in salmon or in sea turtles, for example. Most scientists think that the compass setting that animals have from magnetite is coupled with other senses to create the full navigation ability.
So that was my initial experience, and then I was offered another position at the University of Michigan to go on, where I found work in catfish, smell and taste, particularly the taste sense of catfish. And that sense is strange because catfish have taste buds all over their whole body, so we sometimes call them swimming tongues. They can really taste with their whole body, and they can locate food based on the sense of taste. That's a unique thing that you don't find in very many other fishes. Most of the time fish use smell for the detection of food at a distance and locating the source of the smell when they want to eat.
By using the combination of magnetoreception, which they probably experience like a feeling in their belly or in their beak, along with navigation by the sun, the stars, and even by smell, animals exhibit this superpower that helps them to survive and reproduce. One reason it's so hard for us to really understand how swimming and flying animals experience the Earth's magnetic field is that their ability to navigate is so much more complex than ours.
Animals in air and in water, birds and fishes, are automatically working in 3D space. And for us, walking on solid land, we typically orient ourselves in only 2D space. It makes no difference in terms of how the information is processed. The 3D seems to be more complicated, but again, for the animal, that's not the issue. They don't have to write mathematical formulations about it that make it easier for us to calculate things. They simply have an innate sense of the direction of the field, both in terms of horizontal and vertical components. But there's one interesting thing here, is that the horizontal component will tell them in which direction north is. In other words, they can navigate in the horizontal plane. But the inclination angle, that is the magnetic field, that also has a vertical component, where we are sitting here, is actually pointing down. So the true north for these animals is there is the horizontal and the vertical. And the vertical can give you information as well as the horizontal.
Besides magnetite-based reception, the other possible mechanism that scientists studying magnetoreception are zooming in on is even less understood than magnetite. It is a biochemical sensor based on the protein cryptochrome. Cryptochromes are a type of protein found in animals' eyes that are sensitive to light. Cryptochromes are involved in the circadian rhythms of plants and animals, and many scientists now believe in magnetoreception.
Here at the SSep field station, we have a colony of zebra finches that we maintain in captivity, and that we get individuals to do behavioral tests and different observations. So we decided to work on zebra finches because it's a very known research model. Zebra finches were originally used for neurobiology research because they learn how to sing in the same way that we learn how to speak. So there is a lot of information about their neurobiology, their general physiology, their genome, that it's already known and published. So it is a very useful species to work on, since it has shown magnetoreception capabilities. We can expand.
By studying the zebra finches in the lab, Dr. Pinzon Rodriguez is able to determine that there is a mechanism in their eyes that interacts with the Earth's magnetic field and allows them to see directions.
The other mechanism is a little bit more complex because it refers to chemical reactions that can be affected by the magnetic field. So if you have a chemical reaction that will produce a result under certain alignment with the magnetic field. But if you have a different alignment to the magnetic field, the results of the same reaction will be different. So if you have a bunch of those reactions happening in your body, your brain will pick up on those results, and it will know if you have more results of certain alignment or more results of a different alignment. And the overall interpretation is I'm moving along the field lines or across the field lines, for example. Such reactions are only possible after the input of light. So it's a complex process that requires incoming light, then chemical reactions happening, and then the brain interpreting all of those. The evidence points out that this mechanism reports just the direction of the magnetic lines. So you don't know what is north or south, but you know that the lines are traveling in a certain direction, and you can follow them and move towards the pole or towards the equator. So they don't have this innate need to follow a migratory direction, because they don't do that, but we can train them to follow the magnetic field as long as it's associated with another reward or another task. So we put them to measure the orientation of a zebra finch relative to the magnetic field. We put them in an isolated magnetic coil, so isolated from visual cues, from any landmark, from any other orientation cues, and we record their behavior inside that a cross maze. So if they will move to the train direction, to the magnetic direction, we will see that the bird will move from the center to that direction, even in the absence of food. They are trained to go to that magnetic direction. So that's how we evaluate it.
What would this sense of the Earth's magnetic field look or feel like for these animals?
It is a really tricky exercise to try to describe how an animal will feel something or perceive something, because there is no way to do that. What we can do is understand the mechanism and understand which cells and which parts of the body are involved in this mechanism, and then we can hypothesize how it may work. So since the receptor is located in the eye, and it's probably interacting with photoreceptors, with the visual system, this whole process, this whole magnetoreception system may be interacting with the visual system. We don't know how, we don't know what's the end result, but you can think about many different interactions. the magnetoreception system may produce a brighter image, or it may produce a dimmer image. It may make the image sharper or blurrier. But then those differences will be enough for the animal to use it as a cue. So if the animal needs to move along a magnetic field line, and the visual field of the animal is changed because of that line, then the animal will know that it should go towards the blurry blob or the brighter blob or the spots in the visual field, but we don't really know.
One big question is how many different animals have the ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field. There are tantalizing clues everywhere that it's not just birds and fish and amphibians that have this sense. In 2008, a group of scientists published a study apparently showing that cows like to align themselves with magnetic fields. The scientists from the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany used data from Google Earth to show that domestic cattle seem to prefer to align their bodies along Earth's magnetic field lines, and showed a similar phenomenon in field observations of deer. A follow-up study showed no such alignment near electric power lines, which might be expected to disrupt magnetosensing in cattle. What evolutionary advantage, if any, the cattle might accrue from this sense is unclear. So why would they do it? Since there is no obvious function for this sense, other scientists hypothesized that the cattle and deer were simply aligning themselves to get the most heat from the sun or to maximize their wind resistance. But close analysis of the Google Earth images, coupled with their geographical location, negates these theories. So what the scientific community has now is a correlation, not a conclusion, and no idea why. Still, it's a fascinating discovery. And what about humans? We know that some people innately have a better sense of direction than others. Is there magnetoreception involved?
Magnetoreception in humans may be conserved at a very subconscious level. I mean, humans have cryptochrons, as all animals do, so the mechanism may be there. There's no very decisive evidence against or supporting human magnetoreception, but it would make sense that we lost that type of sensory ability at the moment humans became sedentary, or that it settled down. At the moment where we didn't have the need to hunt or to migrate, running away from a ice age or something like that. So as soon as mankind settled and ceased exploring and migrating, maybe the sense just became dimmer and dimmer. So I think that it has disappeared because of our habits and the evolution of humankind.
There's research that suggests that humans actually do have the potential to sense Earth's magnetic field, whereas this has been kind of called into question for many years. Recent research is starting to point at the fact that we can start to understand it in certain ways, and there's still a lot of research to be done, but preliminary kind of findings have shown that the brain does react to certain magnetic field kind of stimuli and kind of changes its perception based on the different orientation of magnetic.
Magnetoreception is a sensory modality in the same way as your vision or your hearing is a sensory modality. Magnetoreception enables animals to perceive the magnetic field of the Earth and use it as a source of information to move around their environment. So there is evidence of magnetoreception in all animals, all animal groups in the planet. So insects, fishes, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, all of them have shown in one way or another sensitivity to the magnetic field. And what animals use it for, or the task that we have studied the most, is movement and migration, orientation and navigation. So animals can use the magnetic field as a spatial cue, as a source of information to know where to go. The magnetic field is dynamic enough and different enough across the planet that you can use it as a magnetic address. So if they know that they need to go towards where it's strongest or weakest, or towards where it changes in some specific way, they can use it as a cue to move around.
For most of the 20th century, magnetoreception research seemed as unsavory as the study of dowsing or telepathy. Yet it is now an accepted fact that many animals sense the always-on, barely there magnetic field of Earth. Birds, fish, and other migratory animals dominate the list. It makes sense for them to have a built-in compass for their globe-trotting journeys. Therefore, believing that humans possess this remarkable ability as well is not very far-fetched, considering our migratory past. But if we have this super sense, why don't we feel it now? What would it feel like if we could experience the sensation of magnetic or electric fields like animals do?
A very intriguing question that I and everybody else always asks. What about electroreception? What would it feel like? So sharks have very good electroreception, so do catfishes. So I have worked with these animals, and they do that. You make little electric fields, very, very weak fields, extremely weak fields. And these animals can locate the source of the field, namely 2 electrodes. The question always comes up, how does it feel to us if we had an electric sense? Now clearly we don't have that. The only way we experience electricity is sticking our fingers in the outlet and get shocked. Not good. Or to have an electric fence for cattle, not good either. And that's certainly completely different from the way the animals are using it. So the electroreceptors are excessively sensitive to the tiniest little voltage changes, and these are produced by other animals. So other animals, including you and me, are producing an electric field, but in air you cannot sense it because there is no current, there is no conductivity in air. But as soon as you go in water, and particularly in seawater, you produce a nice electric field. Not very strong, instead very, very, very weak. But it is used by sharks and catfishes to locate prey.
Human existence can actually have potentially negative effects on natural habitats and systems. For example, with bees, you might have heard of colony collapse disorder. And scientists are kind of researching, well, why are all the bees dying out? And this is actually a really detrimental kind of phenomenon that's happening right now, because if bees die out, there are pollinators, and so we're not going to be able to kind of have plants and flowers and food, essentially. And what they're starting to realize is that there's this kind of idea of habitat fragmentation. So due to kind of contamination, for example, or building roads and infrastructure where the bees' habitats are, it's starting to break up their habitats, which is leading them to kind of die out because they don't have a kind of set place where they're starting to live, because we're disrupting that.
Have we humans ruined our ability to detect and use the Earth's magnetic fields through our own technology? If we humans truly had magnetoreception like animals have exhibited, would we be overwhelmed by the stimuli? An analogy might be that this would feel like having sound and light bombard us from every angle all the time. It might drive us to madness. Perhaps this is how or why we lost this biological sense. And the extension of the analogy is, what are we doing to the animals that do experience magnetoreception? Are we destroying their lives and driving them towards extinction?
Electric fields are created by differences in voltage. The higher the voltage, the stronger will be the resultant field. Magnetic fields are created when electric current flows. The greater the current, the stronger the magnetic field. An electric field will exist even when there is no current flowing. If current does flow, the strength of the magnetic field will vary with power consumption, but the electric field strength will be constant.
We're seeing mass extinction in many species around the world, and this is having a lot of negative impacts and could potentially have detrimental impacts on society. Again, looking at bees, for example, and if bees die out, we're not going to have food, so we're probably going to die out as well. And there's a really kind of negative impact on the ability to study and research organisms. As more species die out, there could be some that actually are able to kind of lend more of an insight into how to solve our major problems. And so if they die out, we're not going to be able to find those solutions. In a way, if we think about certain species that have superpowers that we don't even know exist yet, we don't know what we don't know, essentially. So we don't know what we're losing, but we could be losing a certain kind of strategy that will allow us to survive maybe on this planet that we're not tapping into yet. So it's really important that we continue to find strategies to mitigate extinction as best as possible, not only for just the kind of species themselves, but in order for us to survive and think about what are the superpowers that we can actually harness from them and use in a biomimetic way.
Perhaps if we can better understand how the animal's superpowers function, we can use that knowledge to ensure that they do survive.
Our recent findings that salmon have inherited magnetic maps. Now, for a variety of reasons, people have tried to introduce salmon to novel habitats, either as a conservation measure, such as in New England, or to introduce fisheries to places like Argentina or New Zealand. In many instances, these efforts have failed. Our results may provide one explanation.